We have breaking news from the Washington Post tonight. Quote, President Donald Trump called his acting attorney general nearly every day at the end of last year to alert him to claims of voter fraud or alleged improper vote counts in the 2020 election, according to two people familiar with the conversations. The personal pressure campaign, which has not previously been reported, involved repeated phone calls to acting attorney general Jeffrey Rosen, in which Trump raised various allegations he had heard about and asked what the Justice Department was doing about the issue. Rosen told few people about the phone calls, even in his inner circle, but there are notes of some of the calls that were written by a top aide to Rosen, Richard Donahue, who was present for some of the conversations, these people said. Donahue's notes could be turned over to Congress in a matter of days. Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. She is the chair of the House Administration's Committee, which held a hearing today on election subversion. Congresswoman Lofgren, your reaction to this Washington Post reporting tonight?
Well, it's in keeping with many of the other reports we've had about the president's efforts to try and subvert the election, frankly, and we will certainly, I'm sure, and the Select Committee want to know more about that.
You're on the January 6th committee that held the hearing yesterday. You're investigating what led up to the attack on the Capitol, as well as everything that happened that day. But the question of what led up to it is rather broad, isn't it? It's not exactly clear where that boundary is. Were these phone calls to the Attorney General part of what led up to what happened on January 6th?
Well, we'll find out. We're going to follow the facts where they lead us. As one of the officers said yesterday, a hitman was sent. We need to find out who sent the hitman. How did this happen? How was it organized? What motivated it? Who funded it? And the like. And so we will have a broad inquiry and follow the facts and find the truth.
There is some written testimony now that we're looking at tonight that former acting Attorney General Rosen gave to Congress in May, and it now just has a lot more between the lines as we read it. This is what he said in writing. During my tenure, no special prosecutors were appointed, whether for election fraud or otherwise. No public statements were made questioning the election. No letters were sent to state officials seeking to overturn the election results. And no Department of Justice court actions or filings were submitted seeking to overturn election results. And as we read that now, we are left to wonder, are those the specific things that Donald Trump asked him to do every day, and he's putting in writing that he didn't do them without, at that point anyway, telling us that those were actually being requested of him all the time?
Well, we'll find out the answer to that. Those statements, it's like, well, of course not, because none were warranted. But perhaps it was, as you've suggested, really an outline of what he was refusing to do at the president's request. Rather than speculate, we will find out the answer. I also, as you know, today we had a hearing in the House Administration Committee, which I chair. Another aspect of the violence that is being used to try to subvert our system of democracy, and that is the violence that's being directed at regular election officials who are being threatened with guns. We heard from the local election official in Maricopa County, who described a scene that was quite similar to January 6th, except they didn't actually invade the counting center. So we have a pattern here of subversion of the electoral system that we need to take very seriously.
And the Republican legislatures, including Georgia's, for example, and Texas, have been trying to formalize into their state laws what Donald Trump was trying to do over the phone with the Attorney General by basically being able to change the outcome after the vote count. That's what they're trying to put into some of these laws. Your hearing today was addressing some of that.
Yes, we have a bill that would preclude some of what these states are doing to replace the local election officials who are, just counting the ballots. I mean, this has not been something that has been high profile. This has been a boring activity for centuries where you just count the ballots. Now, partisans are seeking, apparently, to take over this function and to skew the results. We can't let that happen, and this bill would prevent it. We had a hearing today. It was very helpful, but chilling as well, because although the registrars and election officials didn't engage in hand-to-hand combat like our brave officers testified about yesterday, they're facing off with armed militants who are seeking to subvert the electoral process. You can't let that happen.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Coming up, Donald Trump found a new way to lose in the Senate today in the infrastructure vote, and he found a new way to lose in Texas last night. Maria Tracy Kumar and Professor Eddie Glaude will join us next. Donald Trump lost big in the Senate today when the Biden bipartisan infrastructure bill moved forward with 17 Republican senators defying Donald Trump's threats against them when they voted to proceed to the bill. And Trump lost last night in Texas. Last night, voters in North Texas chose Republican State Representative Jake Ellzey to fill a vacant House seat over a candidate endorsed by Donald Trump. Jake Ellzey beat Republican Susan Wright, the widow of former Congressman Ron Wright, 53% to 47%. The special election runoff was to finish Ron Wright's term in the 6th congressional district after he died earlier this year from COVID-19. Donald Trump carried that district in 2016 by 12 points, but in 2020 he won the district by just 3 points. Donald Trump endorsed Susan Wright in the final days before the May 1st election, which then went to a runoff. During the runoff, Donald Trump issued 3 statements affirming his endorsement. He recorded a robocall for Wright, and he headlined a telephone rally for her Monday night before the election, and Donald Trump's candidate lost. Joining us now, Maria Tracy Kumar, President and CEO of Voto Latino, and Eddie Glaude, Chairman of the African American Studies Department at Princeton University. His latest book, Begin Again, is now out in paperback. Both are MSNBC contributors. And Maria Tracy, something's happening in Texas.
Lawrence, you and I have talked about this a lot, and that is that Texas is not that ruby red state that everybody thought. If anything, it is becoming much more of a moderate state. And the district that you're discussing, you have a large influx, not just of a growing Latino population, but also young professionals coming in because industry in Texas is changing. You're seeing a lot of folks such as Amazon coming in, Apple coming in, Toyota coming in. And with that, more educated individuals and a changing demographic, that it's one of the reasons why you have Republican Texas legislators trying to prevent people from voting, because it's not the Texas of 10 years ago.
And the full field who ran originally for the seat included Democrats, and the Democrat came in third, just below the line of qualifying for that runoff. And so there's an interesting future for that district. Professor Glaude, it is a fascinating night in Republican world. We saw these 17 Republican votes on the Senate floor tonight after Donald Trump called them fools, after Donald Trump threatened every one of them with primaries in the next election and when they're up for re-election. That's a vote that was unimaginable a short time ago. And in fact, I certainly didn't anticipate it being that big tonight, that vote both against Donald Trump and for the infrastructure package.
Right, Lawrence. It may be an indication that Trump may be losing at least some grip or hold on the Republican Party. but we have to be careful. Remember that Trump has a litany of losses, right? Whether he lost the House of Representatives, the Senate, the presidency, he lost a number of midterm elections and campaigns and the like. That's not where his power resides. I think Donald Trump is a kind of cultural phenomenon. And he sits at the nexus of the kind of dis-ease, discomfort about the demographic shifts that Maria talked about, and this sense that the country is changing. So his power rests in his ability to sow chaos. And how that translates politically varies, I think. So we need to see it on the one hand as him losing the grip, but on the other hand, we need to understand where his power resides, and that is sowing chaos culturally.
And, well, as I say, the Senate delivered a huge vote tonight and a huge win, very important, huge win for Joe Biden in the Senate tonight. It was also a huge win for Chuck Schumer's legislative strategy in the Senate of passing a bipartisan infrastructure bill followed by a larger Democrats-only bill. And at the very same time, and this part was completely unnecessary, and he brought it on himself, but at the very same time, it was a humiliating and crushing defeat for Donald Trump. Any real movement on infrastructure legislation was going to, in effect, be a humiliation and a repudiation of the Trump presidency's complete failure on infrastructure and its repeated pretending that they were going to have an infrastructure week. But Donald Trump actually found a way to make tonight's humiliation much more devastating for himself by actively intervening in the bipartisan negotiations, something no ex-president before him ever did. Former presidents stay out of legislation. But because Donald Trump constantly reaches for new levels of imbecility, and because he seethes with jealousy at Joe Biden's ability to do what he could never do, Donald Trump decided to threaten the Republicans who were negotiating with the Democrats and Joe Biden on infrastructure. On Monday, he called them, quote, weak fools and losers. And based on experience with how much Republican senators have feared Donald Trump in the past, we had reason to suspect that Donald Trump would be able to scare off some Republicans from cooperating with Democrats. Here's the amazing thing. Instead of pulling one or two senators away and ruining the 60-vote threshold on this, the amazing thing is, in fact, since Donald Trump started threatening those Republicans, the number of Republicans supporting the bipartisan infrastructure bill doubled. That's right, it doubled. It doubled to 18, including Mitch McConnell, who voted for proceeding to the bipartisan Biden infrastructure bill. Mitch McConnell stood on the Senate floor and defied Donald Trump today. The final vote was 67-32. 17 Republicans voted for the bipartisan bill. And as I said, the one senator who was absent, Republican Mike Rounds, also actually supports the bipartisan bill. In a celebratory bipartisan press conference after the vote, Republican Mitt Romney said this.
Some time ago, Ted Kennedy made a line at a celebration like this that I'll use. He said something of this nature. He said, I'll apply it in this way. When Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell vote for the same bill, one thing, one of them hasn't read it. But in fact, both of them have. Both of them have been very involved. We've let them know what's going on in this process.
Mitt Romney is a first-time legislator. Almost all the senators who negotiated this bipartisan bill had never really legislated before in the United States Senate because the leadership of both parties in the Senate have taken all the legislative powers away from most senators. None of the committee chairmen have the kind of power that they used to have. And so senators are not experienced legislators anymore. It is wrong to use the word legislator only to mean the people who are elected to positions in legislative bodies. The reality is that the staffs in the Senate and the House do most of the real legislating and know 10 times more about it than the elected officials. They are, in every real sense, legislators. The most experienced legislator, in that sense, in these negotiations is Steve Ricchetti, an advisor to President Biden, who has been managing complex legislation from the White House for Democrats since the Clinton presidency. Much of my confidence in the possibility of a successful bipartisan negotiation and vote in the Senate on infrastructure has been based on my personal knowledge of the skill set Steve Ricchetti brings to this work. When I was working in the Senate, I worked with Steve Ricchetti when he was in the White House, and I watched him masterfully handle the tensions and the technical difficulties of complex legislative packages. With Ron Klain as White House Chief of Staff and Joe Biden as President, the Biden-Klain-Ricchetti team is unmatched in the history of White House legislative experience. Republican Senator Rob Portman did the standard thing tonight, the traditional thing in these situations, by thanking people in the other party and in the White House who he had been working with. But this time he knew, with every word he spoke tonight, he was defying Donald Trump, who just this morning threatened the Republican senators again, this time calling them, quote, weak, foolish, and dumb.
We've worked very closely with the White House on this, and in fact, Senator Sinema and I have been negotiating with the White House in addition to our colleagues, and I want to thank them. I want to thank Steve Ricchetti in particular, who has taken the lead for the White House, also Brian Deese, and President Biden.
And then this happened.
I'm very pleased with our ability tonight to move on to the legislation and continue to demonstrate that.
But, yeah, one question. It is the White House calling, so I need to get going.
Oh.
Yeah, that's Steve.
Yeah.
I shouldn't answer while we're here.
Steve Ricchetti never stops calling, even when the deal is done. President Joe Biden was in Pennsylvania today at a Mack truck factory when he got the word via Steve Ricchetti that they had a deal and that the Senate would vote tonight.
You may have heard that in Washington now, just on the phone, looks like we reached a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure, fancy word for bridges, roads, transit systems, high-speed internet, clean drinking water, cleaning up and capping the orphan wells, over thousands of them abandoned mines, and a modern, resilient electric grid to build. I'm working with Democrats and Republicans to get this done because while there's a lot we don't agree on, I believe that we should be able to work together on the few things we do agree on. I think it's important.
In just one tweet, Bloomberg's Jennifer Epstein captured everything that no one working in the Trump White House ever knew about how legislation gets done. Quote, Biden administration's engagement on infrastructure. Since June 28th, White House Office of Legislative Affairs had at least 330 meetings and calls with members of Congress and their top aides. Jobs cabinet secretaries had 100 with members. Since Jobs Plan release on March 30th, 998 legislative affairs meetings and calls. And leading off our discussion tonight is someone who was in dozens of those meetings and made dozens of those calls, Cedric Richmond, White House Senior Advisor and the Director of the White House's Office of Public Engagement. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Mr. Richmond. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
When did you get the word that there was a deal, and was there any point where your confidence had become shaky about this?
No, through the whole process, looking at the people who were involved, including the bipartisan group of senators, but also the president. I think I was on one of the stations a couple of weeks ago, and I said people continue to underestimate President Biden, and he continues to deliver, and it's really because he has such a intentional team. So you talk about Steve Ricchetti, but you have to talk about Anita Dunn and Ron Klain and Louisa Terrell also, along with Brian Deese and Susan Rice. I mean, the thing that is so special is the fact that he says, let's just keep our head down, do the work. We don't have to grandstand. We don't have to beat our chest. Let's just deliver for the American people. So it's the same thing we did with vaccines and getting them shots and arms. It's the same thing we're going to do with infrastructure, and then we'll go to the families plan. And we're going to keep every day waking up to see if we can't make people's lives better.
One thing that I know the president does, and I know that the real pros in legislation do, is they ignore the things that are said by people they're negotiating with when those things aren't particularly helpful or seem to be in conflict. And you know, not surprisingly, a few weeks down the road, that thing that seems to be a conflict disappears. I'm going to raise one of those issues tonight. It may be one of those things that is made to disappear over time, but it's Senator Sinema who issued a written statement to an Arizona newspaper after this deal was announced today, referring to the other track of infrastructure legislation, the Democrats-only bill that's going to go through reconciliation. She said about that, I do not support a bill that costs $3.5 trillion. Now, that's kind of odd because all of the Democrats, including Senator Sinema, had a celebration with President Biden when that $3.5 billion deal was agreed to by the Senate Budget Committee members. What is your reaction to what Senator Sinema had to say tonight?
Look, we find Senator Sinema to be thoughtful, to be very deliberate about what she's doing. But also, this is the legislative process. It's the sausage-making process. So a lot of times you just can't, people will make their positions known, but that's why it's called legislating. And, you know, I think what President Biden is doing is showing the real art of making the deal. And so, yes, we read the statement. We take Senator Sinema at her word. But this is a long process, and this indicates where she is today at this moment. So every statement is a snapshot in time, and we look forward to continuing to work with her. She played a very important role in this bipartisan deal, and we expect her to play a big role in the families plan as we invest in the human infrastructure and the American people.
Let's listen to what Senator Schumer said tonight after this big procedural win.
My goal remains to pass both bipartisan My goal remains to pass both the bipartisan infrastructure bill and a budget resolution during this work period. Both. It might take some long nights. It might eat into our weekends, but we are going to get the job done, and we are on track. Again, the vote tonight means we're on track to reach our two-track goal.
What's so interesting about that is Senator Schumer has said that from the start, and yet there came a point a few weeks ago where some Republicans acted as if they were surprised when Senator Schumer said that again after the bipartisan deal was first agreed to at the White House with the president. And so that's one of those examples of what I would just call noise in the legislative process, where those Republicans pretended that they didn't know there was a second track. And now tonight, it's completely non-controversial that there's a second track. And there's 18 senators, Republican senators, supporting the bipartisan deal.
This is legislating at its best. This is presidential leadership at its best. This is what the American people tell me as I travel the country. Where you agree with Republicans, agree. Get it done. Move on. And the places where you don't agree, go fight about it. So we agree on this historic investment in infrastructure in this country, removing lead service lines, going to our schools and homes, an historic investment in Amtrak. But we may not agree on the investment in people and adding 4 years of free public education so we can win the future. But where you agree, get it done for the country. And where you disagree, go fight. Now, we have every intention of winning the fight, and President Biden has won every fight so far. So we feel good about it, but this is what people want. Get together, make progress, and where you don't agree, go hash it out. And so we're going to hash it out on the families plan. We're going to take our case to the American people, why it's important to invest in them and their future, and the care economy, and clean energy. All of those things are just as important as the physical infrastructure, and we're going to make the case for it, and we feel good about it.
Cedric Richmond, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. And joining us now is E.J. Dionne, opinion columnist for the Washington Post and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. And I need someone in the senior ranks of the press corps who has seen everything, E.J., in order to discuss what we're seeing tonight, because I had a lot of confidence that the vote was going to get over 60 because of the players involved who I know and who you can tell from the grandstand are really expert at what they're doing. But I would not have predicted to you 67 votes on the Senate floor, and one of them was going to be Mitch McConnell. And actually, another Republican who was absent would have brought it to 68.
Yeah, no, this was really striking. I got to say, I hope Donald Trump is watching your show tonight, because I think he threw a shoe at the television set when Cedric Richmond said President Biden is showing the real art of making a deal. He was the one who claimed he could make a deal. Biden is the guy who can. And I, too, never expected it to get this high, but I think both of us thought this was going to pass. And the reason we thought it was going to pass is because, A, the strategy made sense. You can't get the moderates to vote for a big bill if you don't do the bipartisan bill, but you can't pass the bipartisan bill if you don't pass the big bill to get the progressives. And there's going to be a lot of back and forth between them, but I think they're going to get there. The person I thought of tonight, if I could just do a shout out to someone who's no longer with us, is a congressman called Steve LaTourette, who I interviewed him a couple of years before he died. He was pretty conservative, but he was old-fashioned. He liked roads, bridges, and transit. And he said he quit Congress because we couldn't pass a transportation bill anymore. I would love to be able to call Steve LaTourette and say, guess what? They are passing a big transportation bill. And I think you're seeing here something bigger than just one bill. You're seeing a real shift away from the view government can't do any good anymore. And I think that comes straight out of the pandemic, where both parties realized you had to spend a heck of a lot of money to get us out of that mess.
Donald Trump quadrupled the size of his humiliation in this. This morning, he said in one of his written statements, if this deal happens, lots of primaries will be coming your way. So that means about 6 or 7 in 2022. Donald Trump has to tonight start recruiting Republican primary challengers to about 7 of these Republican senators, depending on how many of them decide to run for election, who are up in 2022. And yet they knew that. They saw every word that Donald Trump said. They went out there and they defied Donald Trump tonight, and they did it in large numbers. And Mitch McConnell's vote, by the way, one of the things that occurred to me is one reason for his vote is not just getting that bridge in Kentucky that he desperately needs, but also protecting his members who have been threatened by Donald Trump, to show that the actual Republican leader of the Senate is on board with this bill also, at this stage anyway.
Well, you suggested something at the beginning, Lawrence, that I agree with, which is I actually think Trump's intervention helped the Democrats put this together. A couple of days ago, I got a text from a top Democratic aide who said, will the Republicans follow Donald Trump, or will they try to make a deal? And I think this might be significant. You know, Donald Trump will have a lot of power in that party. There are a lot of Republican rank and file who will vote with Donald Trump. But I think Republicans are starting to realize that a very close relationship with this man could really hurt them, especially among swing voters in the suburbs, and now even among some of his working class supporters who basically like transportation bills. They like building roads. They like the jobs that are involved here. And then I also think that McConnell may have been persuaded by the idea that if they're going to attack the big bill, they better not be complete obstructionists on this. So maybe the full obstruction strategy.
When I put my hand in that Bible on January 20th, took the oath of office, I made a commitment to the American people. We're going to change the paradigm so working people could have a fighting chance again. to get a good education, to get a good job and a raise, to take care of that elderly parent and afford to take care of their children, and stop losing hours of their lives stuck in traffic because the streets are crumbling, or waiting for slow, spotty internet to connect them to the world. That's what the economy we're building is all about.